Hey guys, it's Sarah here from Equestrian Movement. Um, just coming in for tonight's Thursday training live session where we're going to be talking about our inner critic, that little annoying voice that hits us sometimes and unfortunately will distract us from our goals and create some confusion and upset. So if you guys are here, let me know. Tell me where you're from, where you're hooking in from. Love to know more. I'd love to know how you've been seeing or how you've been responding to the Thursday night lives as well. Let us know what sort of topics you're interested in, and if you have any other topics that you would really like us to work on, jot them down or send us a message in the group. Hey Katie, hey Kelly, Natasha and Jenny, thank you very much for joining so far, and Sophie. So it's a very exciting but slightly nerve-wracking evening this evening because we're actually going to be talking about our inner critics, that little voice inside that is highly, highly annoying. So let us know if you have this problem, if you struggle with that little inner voice telling you that perhaps you're doing something wrong or you're not doing something good enough. Shout out and let me know how you guys are going. Actually, shout out and tell me where you're from. Hi, Beck. Hi, Soph. It's great to have you here tonight. I will allow a few other people to come on tonight before I start in with the spiel. And before I continue on with talking about our inner critic. But for those of you who have been here, how have you been enjoying the Thursday night live topics? Katie's been absolutely fabulous, and thank goodness, sometimes she says that I'm the motivator, and let's face it, sometimes she is more motivated than me, and definitely more active in this Facebook group than me, while I'm managing crazy work life at the moment. And I'm talking about the, non-horsey work. Unfortunately, as much as I would love to have more time on here, I do at the moment have another full-time job that I have to continue to work at, and at the moment it's been taking up a lot of my time, which is okay, but unfortunately doesn't leave me a lot of time to do the things that I really love, which is quite frankly talking about ponies. So hi Jenny, hey, all the way from Perth. I hope you guys are having much nicer weather than I am. And if you just excuse me for 2 seconds, I hear a very upset furball outside the door. What are you doing? Coming? She's 18, I give her everything that she wants, so forgive her. Hello, darling. So, as I said, tonight I wanted to have a bit of a chat about our inner critic. It's a topic I think that's a little bit dear to me, and something that I've been spending a lot of time working on personally. And I'm sure that a few of you guys get in the same sort of situation as as I do, in that sometimes our little voice inside our heads does take over and does, unfortunately, occasionally win that argument. And the reason I wanted to talk about this tonight is because we are this month working on a focus, which is getting quiet and still with your horse. So when we're getting quiet and still with our horse, a few things can actually evolve from that. And unfortunately, one of the more negative aspects is that inner voice actually has a moment to get a lot louder. So when our inner voice does take over, it can create some real conflict for us and drive us to a point where we suddenly lose our focus or confidence, and we need a lot more support on that. So where I'm coming from, so I've been a student writer for maybe the last 5 or so years. I've been working with Katie for about 5 years, and there have been plenty of times during my writing career, and even while I've been working with the Equestrian Movement, where that little inner critic voice has gotten very vocal, and I've had to pull myself together and put some techniques in place to be able to move forward so that we can continue to do what is right for custard without my confidence being shattered. Having said that, the inner critic isn't just the little voice in our head that talks to us and tells us that we're not good enough for our horse, it can tell us that we're not good enough for quite a lot of things. And probably over the last 18 months, this is an area that I have been personally developing on. So I'm going to put it out there and say 100%, I am not a therapist. And thank goodness, I don't think I could handle everybody's secrets and keep them secret. So I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but what I wanted to do tonight is to talk a little bit about that inner voice, share some of those opinions, let you guys talk openly about the inner critic, because sometimes when we keep that inner critic internal, it has a lot more power when we open up the voices inside our head and actually say what they're saying. They suddenly lose the amount of power that they've been holding over us for a long period of time. But yes, I'm definitely not a therapist. So if you are really, really struggling with this, I'm here to offer some of the techniques that I've either read about or experienced or tried. And if you need more support, I 100% recommend that you do it. There's no weakness in seeking additional help. There is no reason that should prevent you in any way, shape or form for looking after your mental health just as well as you should be looking after your own physical health as well. And your family's physical health and your horse's physical and mental health as well. You probably should look after your family's mental health as well. Morning, Hazel, all the way from Scotland. And you guys are just cracking into winter as well, so I wonder if you've got some hazy morning moors over there. All right, so as I said, the reason I wanted to talk about that is because unfortunately, when we are practicing our quiet and still movements or moments with our horse, the inner critic has that moment to get a lot louder. And sometimes we do have to deal with that and move that forward before we can continue progressing. That inner critic is also a really big thing that we must face and we must own, and we must develop our coping mechanisms to continue to grow and move forward, learn and adapt. We can do it in lots and lots of things. So as I said just before, I've personally been dealing with this inner critic for the last 18 months. And one of the reasons I've been dealing with this inner critic is because I've been going through some weight management issues. And one of the reasons that I realized that my inner critic was as loud as she was is because of that weight management process, trying to lose weight and then realizing that she actually had a lot more impact on me than I actually thought about. And I'll talk about why I speak about the inner critic in a third person in a moment. Or is that second person, actually? One of those. So what is our inner critic? Has anybody ever experienced those inner critic moments that wants to share them? Obviously, don't feel like it if you don't want to, but if you have had those moments where that little voice inside your head has told you certain things, please do share them, because I think it helps a lot of us when we know that it's not just something that you yourself are going through. Like a lot of people do deal with these issues, and at some point almost in all of our lives we go through these issues. So the inner critic is that internalized voice. It often is telling us that we are not enough. So it's, you're not good enough, you don't know enough, you don't spend enough time, you're a bad person, you're a bad owner, you're a bad rider. And even more subtly is my horse deserves better than me. So if you guys have experienced any of those in any way, shape or form, let me know. It is, as I say, it's one of those things that we all challenge with. And sometimes I think when we find ourselves in a really great group like you guys are, I must admit this group has been absolutely amazing. Katie has said it before as well, but we just absolutely gobsmacked at how supportive everybody in this group is, especially when we know that so many horsey groups, and I do say this particularly about horsey groups, are very, very opinionated, and everybody has their own opinion, and everybody's opinion is right, and therefore your opinion cannot be right. So you feel a bit challenged. Our inner critic, inner critic feeds on that, which is really terrible. So our group is very much not about that. We want to be able to share that aspect to help you guys develop and grow and build your bond and all of that. And Sophie, I've just seen your message that you've said that you're broken, and oh my God, I hope you mean literally broken. Actually, I hope you don't mean literally broken, but don't feel like you're bad enough just because you have an injury in any way, shape or form, because you know what, injuries happen. Injuries happen to our horses all the time, and we never ever tell them that they're not good enough just because they're injured, do we? And if we are, frankly, should we be owning that horse? And that's the kind of thing we need to think about from ourselves. You know, if we are injured, or if we are perhaps even just mentally not coping at that time, that doesn't mean that we're not good enough and that we can't be there later. It just means that at the moment we're facing some challenges, and we're going to develop, what we need to do is develop some techniques to get around that. So back onto our inner critic voice. Now, just in preparation for this, I did a little bit of research, and it's quite interesting. There's lots of varied opinions about our inner critic. And psychologists actually do suggest that inner critical voice is something that develops in ourselves when we are super, super young, like, you know, less than 5. So it's something that we end up dealing with for quite a long time. And sometimes if we don't actively refute it or acknowledge it, it can develop into such a strong, strong voice that has a massive impact into how we manage our day-to-day lives. The psychologists do say, sorry if you can hear Seema in the background, she's very upset that I'm not paying her specific attention right now. Are you coming up? Yes? Do you want to say hello to everybody? Come on. So this is my 18-year-old who's very, very affectionate and very, very demanding. And my firstborn #1 daughter. So psychologists actually do suggest that our inner critic, as I said, is built when we're built in once we're much, much younger. And it's often something that's created due to the simple fact that our parents have said something, or a person of authority, I won't blame our parents for these, but a person of authority has told us some sort of words like, you know, don't be stupid, or that's shameful what you've done. That's how the inner critic develops. So the inner critic is not something that you just suddenly have, and it's certainly not something that just develops just because you've got a horse and you feel like you don't know something. It's been there for most of your life. The important thing to know about that is that despite the fact that it's been there for most of our life, we aren't screwed. We can develop coping mechanisms and processes to deal with these and step forward out of them. And then sometimes that inner critic's going to challenge us again, and it's going to pop up yet again in a new scenario, in a new way, and we just need to keep remembering our exercises. In that particular way, our inner critic can sometimes be a little bit like a headstrong horse that you have to continually show that you are the biggest leader, the best leader for it, and your opinion is the one that matters the most. And what they are saying, yes, it has some validity. I might listen to it, but I'm going to move forward with my activity anyway because this is important to me. So the aspect from when and how our inner critic impacts us most, I'm going to talk about how it impacts us first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about when it's most likely to hit us. So in terms of how it impacts, and initially, it is pretty much going to be holding us back. It holds our unless we develop coping mechanisms to get past those particular criticisms, it can actually stop us from progressing forward. In more extreme cases, it can actually lead to all sorts of problems, including relationship breakdowns, anxiety, and depression. So it's not something that we should be disregarding or disrespectful of. It is And that's why I say, well, I'm not an actual therapist. So if you do need that additional support, I actively encourage you to seek some, whether it's a strong support network of friends or whether it's an actual qualified therapist going forward. It can lead to a lot more problems. When it comes to what our inner critic can do with us, with our horses, is it shatters our confidence. And when our confidence becomes more inconsistent, we stop showing up as a good leader to our horses. Or we can actually feed that lack of confidence to our horses as well, so that they become a lot more anxious. And these are not necessarily things that we want to be doing on a day-to-day basis, because it can actually create more problems for that particular horse, and they lose a lot of that discipline and focus and respect for us. So it can do a couple of other things, but those are probably the main ones that I think about when we don't have that confidence in there. And certainly when I first started working for Custard, and Katie can attest to this, probably for the first maybe 3 to 6 months when I was working with Custard, and I'll be honest, I was in the middle of grieving for another horse as well. So part of me was feeling a little bit of guilt for losing the other horse, a little bit of guilt that I was actually bringing another horse through that I could possibly lose as well. And of course, just going, we're not the right fit. We don't have a connection. We don't have a bond. I'm not the right person for this particular horse. It took a long time to actually get past those phases. And I think the big breaking point for us was around the 12-month mark. And from my perspective, obviously there'd been a lot more leading up to that between the 6 and 12-month mark. But I knew that I was doing the right thing the day that he nickered at me when I was coming down to the paddock after a long break because I'd hurt my back yet again. So I'd been away for about 3 weeks, and he nickered at me from across the paddock, and I was like, yes, my baby boy loves me. And then I realized that I actually called him my baby boy. So I'd actually gone from the point of thinking that I wasn't good enough for him, and maybe that we shouldn't be together, to he's my baby boy and we love each other. So the inner critic can have some strong sways on it, and there are definitely some other aspects that help work with that. Hey Mel, love to see you here. When our inner critic happens, now this is the fun part. I want to talk a little bit about the learning scale that humans go through. So there are 4 phases. Our first phase in the learning scale is what they refer to as unconsciously unskilled. It literally means you don't know what you don't know. It's pretty cool. So in that particular phase, and I still remember the very, very first time that Katie and I met, and I had my little mare, and we were doing all sorts of weird and wacky things together, including a jig jog trot that I had absolutely no control over. I just sat on her back and bounced around, and she just went wherever she wanted. And I was going, I don't know. Just a few steps before that, I was unconsciously unskilled, and getting Katie in was a result of, because I realized something was wrong. And that was the next step of my learning phase, which is called consciously unskilled. I knew that I didn't know something. And this is a big part. So first of all, we start off with unconsciously unskilled. We don't know what we don't know. We go to consciously unskilled. I know I'm missing something, but I don't have that something. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that. We then progress to consciously skilled. And our consciously skilled is when you know what you're doing and you know that you're doing it because you are watching yourself do it regularly, and you are monitoring yourself as you do that. And then finally, the 4th stage of the learning process is what they call unconsciously skilled. And that's when you just do things on autopilot. So if you think about it, maybe when you're cooking something and it's the first time you've ever cooked it, let's go, because I know that there's a few Kiwis in our group, let's go with a pavlova and just let's start that debate between the Aussie and the Kiwi pavlova ownership. So the first time you cook a pavlova, the first time you ever cook that pavlova, you have no idea what you need in your recipe. You really don't know what's going to be entailed. Hell, you might not even know you've been expected to cook the pavlova. That is unconsciously unskilled. Then you get to the point where you're consciously skilled. You know you've got to cook a pavlova, but you don't know how to do it. Oh my God, what's the recipe? What's in there? I'm going to have a little bit of a freak out. And yeah, I don't cook pavlovas, so I probably would. I would be at consciously unskilled. Then you've got consciously skilled. You're practicing that pavlova. It's probably the second time that you're cooking a pavlova at this stage, or third time. You're practicing, you're utilizing the ingredients are there, you've got your ingredients, you know the process, you've figured out what didn't work the first time, you're learning that. And then you get to your 10th pavlova and you're whipping them up in no time whatsoever. And sometimes even having that little internal giggle about when people say, oh, I couldn't cook a pavlova, it's so hard. And you're going, yeah, it's so simple. So that is a way of thinking of the learning processes. So 4 steps: unconsciously unskilled, where you don't know what you don't know. Consciously unskilled, you now know you don't know something, but you don't necessarily know what you need to do. Consciously skilled, you know what you need to do, and you're watching yourself regularly doing that. And then unconsciously skilled, where it's all autopilot. It's quite fun because if you are working with training horses and in the riding and building them up through self-carriage and through to the next phases in that as well, you'll find that there's areas where you know what to do because you and your horse have been doing it for a while because you're building up that ladder, and then you'll go back down to those exercises really easily because you have built in that that skill level and it's just autopilot for you. But then when you scale up to the later more advanced skills or exercises, you might not be familiar with it. And that's certainly where I am with Custard at the moment, where I'm starting to get to the point of throughness with him, and I'm going, oh my God, I don't remember these exercises because I've done them once. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about the learning scale is because our inner critic is at its biggest volume when we are at the consciously unskilled section. When we are at that stage where we know that we don't know something. And this is the biggest thing. It's because our inner critic is really ourselves. It knows our biggest desires, but it knows our biggest fears as well. And it can really play on those. It's actually suggested that the inner critic, if I didn't say this beforehand, the inner critic is actually a safety mechanism for us. It helps us avoid, it keeps us from failing or keeps us away from the pain associated with shame. And that's the big thing. So if it knows our fears, it's going to play on those fears, and it knows some of our desires. So it's going to tweak some of those desires that are going to get us to the point where it's like, you know what, I don't need to do this because I don't need to fail. So this inner critic is a little fun beast to actually have, and really fun one to really play with. So what is it that we can actually do to manage our inner critic? There are heaps and heaps of different ways that we can do it. Again, I'm going to preface here, just excuse me a moment while I let the cat out now. Are you going out? Okay, see ya. Older kitties. There are heaps and heaps of different ways, and if you are feeling significantly overwhelmed and don't necessarily feel like you can actually progress forward without help, do please act. I do encourage you to go and get it. I am actually going to be honest and share something with you guys that I haven't actually shared with anybody else outside of Katie and my husband, and that is that I am actually going to see a counsellor myself because I am in a state of overwhelm as well. So I'm not in a state where my mental capacity is able to manage my inner critic anymore, and it is definitely hitting me hard. And I find I've just made that decision that I do need that little bit of extra help. It's not a weakness as much as my upbringing would probably try to tell me it is. It is something that we definitely something that I just definitely have to do. So, don't feel shame or weak or anything in that in terms of asking for extra help, because sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have the answers, and our friends don't have the answers, and our family doesn't have the answers, and our boss and our work doesn't have the answers, and our horses are a great place to go to, but sometimes they don't have the answers for us either. So work on those. But I want to share with you some of the things that I've worked on and some of the other things that worked on in the past, and some of the things that I have also read about that I'll probably start implementing in the meantime while I wait for my counsellor appointment. But the very biggest thing, and actually now that I'm talking to you guys about it, I'm finding myself feeling very cathartic right now. I'm releasing a lot of tension. So thanks for being my therapy right now. But the biggest thing that you can very much do is to start managing your inner critic is to accept that you are human. That's it. You're not perfect. We aren't designed to be perfect. If we were perfect, we would never grow. We would never do anything more adventurous. We would never learn. Even though we are not perfect, even though I am not perfect, I am enough. And I want you guys to say that. If you guys are feeling that particular voice joining in, I want you guys to turn around and tell yourself, I'm not perfect, but I am enough. In actual fact, if you need even more inspiration on that, Marissa Peers is quite vocal, and there's a lot of YouTube videos on her. It's really inspirational to listen to her talking about that. Talking about how I am enough and how powerful and awe-inspiring it can be just to say those particular words and have that as your mantra. Write it on sticky notes and put it on your mirror. Chuck it in. I've heard of people using it as their screensavers at work, or putting it in the background of their phone so that they're constantly reminded whenever they're looking at something that, yeah, I actually am enough. I don't have to be perfect. I am enough just as I am. And you know what? The other part about me being not perfect and being enough is that I'm enough of a person to continue to learn. The other thing I want to point out is we constantly allow for our horses to make mistakes. In actual fact, Katie and I encourage you to let your horse make mistakes, because the horse learns by making the mistake and then having the pressure released for making the correct decision. So why can't we do that? Why can't we allow ourselves to make mistakes? Why, when we make one mistake, do we sit there and think about it and think about it and think about it and keep thinking about it, literally chew on that particular moment with no benefit whatsoever? We're just stewing in guilt. So be prepared to accept yourself as human. Know that you are enough of a person, particularly for your horse. And just know that you need to be prepared to change, to grow, to learn, to adapt. And only then are you actually going to improve. Our inner critic is all about keeping us safe, but it stops us from progressing. So obviously, in certain cases, it's there to keep us definitely safe. And if the situation is very, very dangerous, don't do it. But if you're sitting there and you know, theoretically, you should be able to do this, and your mind is saying, hey, I don't think you're good enough for that, then it's holding you back. I think about that. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been a student with Katie for about 5 years, and the one thing that I wrote on Katie's student form was that I wanted to learn to canter and I wanted to go to dressage competition. Now, here's the thing. It's 5 years down the track. I haven't been to a dressage competition, not one. Well, not participated in one anyway. And I have barely learnt to canter. I certainly haven't properly actively cantered by myself in any way, shape or form. And my inner critic loves this particular part because he's going, yeah, you suck. You totally aren't a good enough rider. And now I know that this is just to keep me safe because I have a fear of performing in public. And I have she says as she's on Facebook Live, and I have a fear of falling off in this particular canter. And for some reason, the canter movement is very, very scary for me. And then, from my mental capacity, I think, oh my God, I'm going to be stuck in trot forever. I'm going to be one of those people who never progresses out of trot. So the first thing I need to say about that is, what's so wrong about that? Really? Is that so bad? I can ride the horse and I can ride a trot really well. Does that make me a bad rider? Definitely not. The second thing is, I can remember all of the times that we have attempted to start the cantering that have been put on halt. The first time was because I hurt my back and I couldn't keep going. I had to go back down physically, down the training scale physically myself, to be able to build up the strength again to get back into that canter. The second time I stopped cantering, it was all Katie's fault because she went on maternity leave. No, I joke, it's not Katie's fault. The reason that I stopped cantering the second time is because the school horse that I was utilising that was balanced enough to be able to go into a nice steady canter so that I could learn how to sit it nicely without injuring myself accidentally, got pulled from the school for one reason or another. So suddenly I was back to having horses that had very unsteady gaits and canters, and I couldn't sit it and I couldn't feel comfortable in it. So that put the halt on the canter while we developed those horses back up into a proper working development. So it's quite cool because the next techniques that I'm going to talk about are the techniques I've used to combat the mental critic that I have that tells me that I'm not good enough because I can't canter and I haven't been in a dressage competition yet. So the first thing that I've done there is I've actually given my critic a name. And I'm going to tell you, excuse me if this sounds a bit rude, but I call her bitch face because she is a nasty little bitch. Sometimes like me, but a lot ruder. But what you can do when you provide that particular inner critic name is you're giving it a separate personality that allows you to address it. So it's no longer just your brain going, there's a separate entity in there that's having a bit of chat. Of course, if you are dealing with multiple personality issues, please don't do this. You don't need another one in there probably. Speak to your therapist before you do that. But that's how I found it quite handy, is to be able to literally have those debates, because I can separate that thought going, hey, hang on, that was a bitch face thought, not my thought. Let's address that. And I argue my point. So maybe I'm not a good enough rider to ride my horse at canter just yet, but that's because my horse isn't balanced enough and I don't want to risk hurting myself. So I'm okay with not cantering him yet. In fact, I'm okay with not trotting Custard yet because he's not balanced enough in his trot. And I don't want to injure myself just by a wrong movement with his own jerky movement. So giving your inner critic a voice, a name, can help you separate that voice from your normal thought processes and help you to formulate, I guess, a discussion point or a debate or an argument, depending on how intense you want to get with it internally. Another thing that you can do, and I have tried this, but I'm absolutely hopeless at keeping regular with it because I'm so busy writing so many other things that by the time I look at journaling, I just shudder. But you can actually write your thoughts down. So journaling is thought to be a very cathartic process for a lot of people. It really allows us to stop ruminating on that particular problem. We're putting it out there in the open. When I get to a particular point where I'm feeling really intensely stressed by this inner critic, I do write it down. I just don't use it on a regular basis personally. But when I do write it down, I definitely feel that little bit of release. I've separated it out of my brain, put it down on paper, and now I can look at it more analytically instead of having it just rolling through my head on and on and on. Having said that, seeing what you are actually thinking is really shocking. Sometimes there's been times when I've looked at that and thought, oh my God, if somebody actually read this, they would think I'm totally insane. Or if I said that to a friend, they wouldn't be my friend anymore. Like that is not something I would say to a friend of mine. So why is it okay to say it to me? Another way to think about it is this something you would actually say to a 5-year-old? Because would you belittle and berate a 5-year-old just saying you're not good enough and you don't ride well enough? Because I certainly wouldn't. Once you've written it down, there's a couple of extra steps you can take. You can write a response to it. Imagine that what you've written down was something that a friend of yours has said to you, and then write what you would say back to them. Because it is really interesting at how we would be completely supportive to a friend or a colleague or even a stranger, but not to ourselves. So write down what you would say to a friend if your friend had said that to you, because that is what is going to be true. You can also destroy it. If you have a little bit of a streak in you that likes to sort of get a little bit more physical, tearing things up, that kind of thing, burn it, shred it, with a glass of wine, I do recommend, by the way. These are different things you can do to release that energy because it's not there anymore. And as I say, the other thing you can do is just imagine if you had said those words to a friend or a 5-year-old or a colleague, and put those words into your mouth saying it to someone else rather than in your brain saying it to yourself. It is highly, highly, highly unlikely that you will ever repeat those to a particular person. I won't say it to I won't say that you wouldn't say it to every single person, but you probably wouldn't say it to most of your friends. You certainly wouldn't say it to a 5-year-old. So why are we allowing ourselves to do that? Think of different ways we can get about it. Okay, another management technique is to really talk about it. When we're talking about it, we do want to be in a supportive network. So either in a group that you feel comfortable sharing that information with one of your close friends or a group of your close friends, or if you need to with a professional. Talking about it and releasing it actually releases the hold that it has on you mentally and allows you again to start processing more on an analytical aspect rather than allowing it to sit in your mind and keep festering and stewing, and you just keep feeling worse and worse about yourself because you've never really taken the next step to get it out. Another suggestion has been, which I'm not sure if I can do, seeing as I've called my inner critic bitch face, befriending your inner critic. I mean, if you think about it, this little voice inside your head has been designed to keep you guys safe. So of course, you know, some of the fears or the imagined pain could be imaginary. It could be really real, but it could be really imaginary. But that's the reason that this inner voice has been created in the first place. It's there to keep you safe from some imagined emotional pain. So when you befriend it, acknowledge that voice. Say, yep, okay, I understand. At the moment, you think that I'm not good enough. But I actually then we're going to disagree with it. We are on purpose going to say the exact opposite of what that inner voice has actually said. You think I'm not good enough. I know I am good enough. And the reason I know I am good enough is because I'm going to continue to learn. And I'm going to do it while I'm keeping safe. So the reason I know that I am going to learn to canter and I am good enough to canter is because I'm going to continue to learn and improve my seat, and I'm going to canter when I know that it's safe for me to canter on a horse that's got balance and I'm not going to get injured. Does that make sense? Let me know if you guys are feeling it. I'm loving the suggestions. Katie, you're definitely a journaler. You definitely do a lot of scrolling and writing. I don't know how you keep doing that outside of all the rest of the writing that we keep doing, because my brain keeps going, nah, another pen, no way. Hazel, I love your idea, taking it outside, burning the paper and release it to the universe. Yes, it's what I'm all about. My final suggestion for tonight, talking about our inner critic. When our inner critic gets really, really vocal and it's focusing on a particular area in your life, I really want you guys to think about where you were before. Think about what you were doing a long time before and where you are now, because chances are you have come a long, long way. If I go back, so thinking about that, you can't canter. When thinking about the whole I can't canter inner critic voice that happens to come out when bitch face is feeling particularly nasty, I just think back to the very first time that I started riding. When I first started riding at my bestie's property, I couldn't sit in a bigger trot. I couldn't manage a horse. And now I look at it and yeah, I'm not riding a horse at canter, but I'm riding a horse all the way through self-carriage right now, and he is getting really, really well. And then I'm riding a horse in school that's in the exact same position, and I'm bringing him up through his training. I got the ultimate compliment as far as I'm concerned when another school teacher asked me to actively keep coming back to ride this particular school horse because she wanted to put more miles on him. She wanted someone more experienced to do it. And hey, I was like, oh my God, I'm an experienced rider. I would never have said it to myself mentally. And then I was like, yeah, someone said it to me, so I'm awesome. So I have come a lot further. And chances are you have too. Your inner critic is only there to keep you going forward and keep you safe. If there's no risk involved, he's just stopping you from progressing. So the other thing is when you consider where you were before as well, you can also look at what steps you've taken. Chances are a lot of those steps have been small achievable wins to get you to that particular point. And even if they're not, what you can look at doing is going, yeah, okay, so you don't think I'm going to canter? So do you know what I'm going to do? I am going to make sure that I can balance neatly in my trot. Then I am going to balance neatly in my trot without stirrups. Then I am going to balance neatly in my trot in a sit trot. And then I'm going to progress to a canter. Small, achievable wins. And they're goals to take that you can continue to reward yourself with. This is what we do for our horses. Why can't we do it for ourselves? It gives us all of those little tiny wins that we absolutely love and that actually help to dampen those thoughts of doubt, which actually spur on the inner critic to become a lot more active. So, and yeah, Hazel, you can be right. Sometimes it can be hard to see how far you've come unless someone points it out to you. You can be you can practice skills at sort of understanding where you sit and what steps you've taken, but sometimes that is a bit hard when you're already at the particular point you are right now and you haven't done that beforehand. But it certainly does help when someone else points it out to you as well, because you can suddenly go, oh, actually I am considered a decent rider or a decent horse person or a decent mum or whatever the inner critic is acting on right now. So that are my few suggestions for quieting or managing that inner critic voice. First of all, making sure that you accept who you are and that you are human and that we are allowed to make mistakes and that mistakes are actually part of a learning curve. And without those mistakes, you're not going to grow. Give that critic a name, that voice a name, write down your thoughts, talk about it with trusted people. Befriend that inner critic and consider where you were sitting well before you actually got here to be able to give a fair argument to that critic when it does act up. So what I want you guys to do now is we are still in November, so we are still focusing on quiet and still as our activity. So quiet and still with our horses. Now, if during those particular times when you are actively out there in that paddock and you're just enjoying some quiet time and those little voices that little voice starts to pop up and tell you that, you know, this is stupid, you're not good enough, you're never going to do any well with your horse, any of those types of criticisms, own it and move forward. And if you want, reach out to us. I'm more than happy to help guide you through. I'm happy to offer any advice that you think I can help you with. As I said, I'm not a therapist, but I'm very, very well versed over the last 18 months of practicing managing my bitch face voice. So if it does happen to pop up and you want some techniques or even just want a sounding board, I'm more than happy to jump on. So just message me through Facebook or jump into the group and share your concerns and what your inner critic is telling you to just even see whether or not we can offer some some support in that way, because I can guarantee you in this particular group, there's more than enough support and zero lashback. So definitely keep doing that. If you, I hope you've enjoyed tonight. You know, you've listened to me ramble for a while. You've been my therapy board at the moment. I'm actually feeling really a lot of release lately tonight. So I'm really, really happy that you guys have listened to me continue on. We are always here to help. We want to work you through your horsey journey, so make sure you keep up with us. Thursday night lives are on Thursday night, and I believe Katie will be wrapping up one for the Quiet and Still on Thursday next week. And of course, in December, we will be doing our Stronger Bond workshop again, so make sure that you are sitting on the email list. If you need the link to that email list, let us know and we'll shoot it across to you or pop it in the comments later tonight. But thank you again for being my therapy sounding board, and I hope you have a really lovely Thursday evening. See ya.